First of all, the idea that gender identity is independent of biological sex is insane.
Yeah,
it's wrong. It's wrong.
Public bathrooms and gender binary are often interconnected. Public bathrooms were gender segregated because of our gender binary, and which bathroom someone uses is determined by the gender binary. But the rigid construct of gender only having two options isn't just outdated, it can be harmful to us. Firstly, what constitutes a person's gender is a complicated concept. The most basic understanding, which is a definition the Trump administration had considered, is that a person is either male or female, and determined by the genitals that a person is born with. This is an old definition that goes hand in hand with gender binary. The problem with this definition, though, is that gender is much more complicated. That definition is instead more in line with the definition for a person's sex. Gender is instead what we form when we see each other. If we look at these two people, no matter what, we all subconsciously, at first, identify the person on the left as a man and the person on the right as a woman. In actuality, the two of them are transgender, meaning, as can be seen in this article by Emily Keener, they didn't identify with their gender assigned at birth and decided to transition. It would then be out of place for them to use bathrooms that match their gender assigned at birth. Thus, while observing this example, Jordan Peterson's claim is simply nonsensical. So naturally, if we form gender based on our perception, then maybe our definition of gender should be based on how people present themselves. That is, if someone presents as a male or female, we should then be able to assume their gender and which bathroom they should use. Admittedly, this is a reasonable and simple definition. However, this doesn't account for the varying degrees people can present themselves. As Keener shows, people can vary how they lean towards a particular gender or how they present. As a result, this assumption of someone's gender can lead to gender non-conforming people, or people who do not conform to social expectations appropriate to their gender, to become victimized. In an article by Kyla Bender-Barrett, she explains that when a trans or gender non-conforming person is questioned or found out in the bathroom, the reaction is not to reassess the arbitrary nature of segregating bathrooms by sex, but to violently eject the trans or gender non-conforming person out of the bathroom. The gender binary is responsible for this because it doesn't allow for nuances, or people who don't fall on either side of the binary. Although I have been talking about transgender people, these problems can overlap with cisgender people, or people who simply identify as their gender assigned at birth, as opposed to being transgender. There are several cases of cisgender people receiving the blunt end of what trans and gender nonconforming people receive from being policed in bathrooms. In each case, a cisgender woman is mistaken for a man and either received verbal harassment or an attempt to be violently ejected from the restroom, further linking gender binary's social construct to violence. In addition, gender expectations, which are intertwined with the gender binary, are responsible for its own harm. This study provides just one example of gender expectations harm. Again, the gender binary is responsible because there is no room for anything in between. Therefore, we must open our construct of gender to broader and more realistic terms. Gender is instead a spectrum and a double bell curve. Most men and women fall around these two midpoints, but most importantly, there is plenty of room for our friends that vary in how they present. In conclusion, the gender binary is terribly outdated. It has caused harm and violence to society, and has simply done no good for us. We all must move on to understanding gender as a spectrum, as opposed to only being two options.